Okay, so I'm going to try to answer the big question that I often get on whether or not we should be using Placidus or whole sign. There's a huge debate in the astrological community about this, and there's no real definitive answer. Um, I'd say most people um, go with the whole sign um, for a few reasons, and I'll explain that. So, if we're looking at the chart, I just randomly typed in a date, today's date, 1970, came up with this chart to use as an example. We can see here that in Placidus, the ascendant falls to 22 degrees of Cancer. And so with Placidus, wherever the degree is exactly, they place on the horizon. And then first house follows. Um, and where it gets a bit tricky is that, people aren't sure whether or not the whole constellation that was on the horizon, even though it was like at the end here, should fill the first house completely. Like this. Let's go to whole sign. We're going to redraw like this. So the question that I'd like you to ask yourself, because people leave comments and they're unsure, um, is whether or not you feel that having your ascendant at 5 degrees, 15 degrees, 25 degrees should exempt the first part of that constellation from being in the first house. And the houses, let's just understand that they are a symbolic um, model. That's a developmental model that the person goes through, right? On a physical level, on a mental level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. And so the first house being the physical body on the physical level is um, whatever constellation was rising on the eastern horizon would be fall into that house. And if it's Placidus, then instead of just being Cancer, that falls into that first symbolic house of, the child has arrived. It's here. Let's go outside and look what constellation is on the eastern horizon. Okay, it's Cancer. Cancer is going to fill this house. Placidus says, no, when you were born, there was only a small percentage of Cancer left rising. So we're going to place the following constellation, or a portion of it, which is Leo here, into the first house. And then the houses aren't even divided equally when you go to Placidus. So the Placidus house system was developed by Claudius Ptolemy, which was a person who felt that this was a more concise way to analyze a person's birth chart, and it was more precise because the specific degree was placed on the horizon. So we really have to question, well, how do you feel about that? Right? It's a personal choice. But if you're looking like to experientially feel out like whether your chart aligns more with Placidus house system or with the whole sign house system, then I would recommend that when you're observing your transits, like here, I placed today's transits on this chart, you will especially notice it, whether or not it's in alignment with the whole sign or the Placidus, if something like a planet like Mars is transiting your first house. Because Mars transiting the first house is really going to invigorate the physical body It's going to cause, rashes, disruptions on the skin. Like there's going to be some sort of physical reaction to having Mars transit your first house the majority of the time. And you also just feel, that boost of energy and vitality. So you can kind of gauge it, like track your chart and look at, you know, when Mars is coming around and then it hits your first house, observe it hitting your first house and through the lens of Placidus house system, and then observe it hitting your first house through the lens of whole sign system. And I think that's the best gauge for you to tell whether or not you align more with one or the other. Because if you start feeling Mars into your first house and you're looking at the Placidus house system, then that's probably the best gauge, right? It's always like that experiential, I can experience this. And so, um, it just becomes more concrete for us. Um, but if we're just analyzing it intellectually, having that specific degree on the ascendant on the horizon makes a lot of sense. But does it really play out that way? So I think that's the best way to look at it and to tell, because it does make a huge difference. If, for example, a lot of people are talking about Pluto currently because Pluto is going to be transiting into Aquarius. And if you look at this chart in particular, you have Pluto over here, still in the seventh house, and, not done with it at all. There's like at least 4 years there, if not more, if not 7 or 8, before it goes into the eighth house under Placidus. And if we switch this over to whole sign, um, it would be entering the eighth house in January. So again, gauging with Pluto is a bit more difficult because it's in one house for a really long time. And even though there are very specific themes to each house, an event related to Pluto transiting that specific house might not happen for the first 3-4 years, where you can really say, okay, that was Pluto in my seventh house, or that was Pluto in my fourth house or my third house. So the best gauge, I think, is Mars, and it moves a lot quicker. So it's something that you can actually do on a practical level, and then just look and see, when it's going to be transiting your first house, and track it down. And yeah, that would probably be the best way to determine for yourself which you align more with. Because aside from that, the houses are really symbolic. And the first house is just representing, like I said, the physical body coming into the world. So, aligning it with the constellation that's there, considering pre-shadow, post-shadow, maybe the whole constellation should stay in the first house, even though it's at the 22nd degree, because the energies of the 22nd degree really encompass this more evolved part of Cancer, right? Which is like that. So that whole, like even more of Cancer would be in the first house, the later the degree, not less. So this is just a short little video to get you thinking about it and to answer that question for yourself. But those are the things that you want to look at, and that's what we're looking at when we're observing whether or not we should apply whole sign or Placidus to our transit chart, and to just analyzing our chart for evolutionary astrology and whatever purpose, whatever other purpose. I hope that helps.